A sterile millionaire, Richard Harding, stood as still as the granite angels surrounding him, watching a small boy weep inconsolably at the grave of his late ex-wife. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the silent cemetery, and the wind, a mournful sigh, rustled through the leaves of the ancient trees. Richard, a man accustomed to control and order in the bustling world of pharmaceutical giants, felt a familiar knot of irritation tightening in his chest. This annual pilgrimage to Sarah's final resting place, 7 years after her untimely death, always disrupted his meticulously planned schedule. He adjusted the collar of his expensive overcoat, the fine wool offering little comfort against the chill that seemed to emanate from the very stones beneath his feet. At 48, Richard was a figure of imposing presence, his sharp features and piercing blue eyes often described as glacial. The carefully chosen bouquet of white lilies in his gloved hand felt more like a ceremonial object than an expression of grief. His memories of Sarah had long since faded into a series of sharp, often unpleasant recollections that he preferred not to dwell upon. The path winding through the rows of weathered headstones appeared deserted, save for a solitary figure huddled near a more recent grave a short distance away. As Richard drew closer to Sarah's plot, he recognized the small form as a boy seated in a wheelchair. He looked to be no older than 10, his thin shoulders shaking with the silent, wrenching sobs of a child's profound sorrow. Richard approached Sarah's grave, the gravel crunching softly under his polished shoes. He knelt stiffly, placing the lilies with precise care against the cold stone, mentally checking off this unwanted task from his list. With a sigh of barely concealed impatience, Richard turned to leave, eager to return to the urgent matters awaiting him at Harding Pharmaceuticals. However, his departure was halted by the sight of the boy in the wheelchair, who had managed to maneuver closer, the small wheels struggling against the loose gravel of the path. Their eyes met. The boy's, red and swollen, brimming with a raw grief that seemed too large for his small frame. Richard's, cool and assessing, betraying none of the discomfort he felt at witnessing such unrestrained emotion. "Are you Mr. Richard Harding?" The child's voice, though thick with tears, held a surprising note of steadiness, a fragile anchor in the storm of his sorrow. Richard, taken aback by the directness of the question, gave a curt nod, his hand instinctively reaching inside his coat for his mobile phone, a lifeline back to his ordered world. "My name is Alex," the boy continued, his small fingers fumbling with something clutched tightly in his lap. He finally managed to extract a yellowed, folded envelope, its edges softened with wear. "Before my mom. Before she died last week," Alex's voice wavered, "she made me promise. She made me promise to give you this." He extended the envelope with trembling hands, his gaze fixed on Richard's face with an intensity that belied his tender years. Something in the boy's earnest, unwavering gaze, a plea that transcended his tears, compelled Richard to take the offered letter. The handwriting on the front was instantly recognizable, Sarah's elegant flowing script, a stark contrast to the sterile efficiency of his own. A wave of unexpected unease washed over him as he carefully unfolded the brittle paper. His practiced composure, a carefully constructed shield against the vagaries of human emotion, began to crack as his eyes scanned the unfamiliar words. "My dearest Richard, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and our precious Alex has no one. There is something I should have told you a long time ago, something that I kept hidden, perhaps out of fear, perhaps out of a misguided attempt to protect him. The doctors were wrong, Richard, terribly wrong. You were not sterile. After our divorce, I discovered I was pregnant. The news should have been a joyous miracle, but your clear and often voiced disdain for children, your insistence that they were a weakness, a burden, filled me with a profound and isolating fear. I couldn't bear the thought of you rejecting him, of him growing up knowing his own father found him unwanted. So I kept him a secret, raising him alone, cherishing every moment we had. Now that I am no longer here to care for him, my heart aches with the thought of his future. Despite everything that passed between us, despite the bitterness of our ending, I still believe that somewhere deep inside you there is a flicker of the man I once loved. He is your son, Richard, our son. His name is Alex, and he needs you now more than ever. Please, I beg you, do not punish him for my decisions. He is an innocent, a sweet and brave boy who deserves love and a home. With a mother's eternal love, Sarah. The fragile paper trembled in Richard's suddenly unsteady hand. The carefully constructed walls around his heart seemed to crumble as his eyes darted from the letter to the boy, a dawning horror and a strange, unsettling recognition washing over him. The resemblance, which had been subtly present, now seemed overwhelmingly, terrifyingly clear. Alex had Sarah's gentle eyes, but the shape of his jaw, the determined set of his chin, even the slight furrow in his brow when he concentrated, were undeniably his own. A son. He had a son he never knew existed, a son now orphaned and vulnerable. A cold dread mixed with a flicker of something akin to guilt settled in the pit of Richard's stomach. Where are you staying now, Alex? Richard managed to ask, his voice sounding strangely thick and unfamiliar, even to his own ears. Alex's gaze, still clouded with grief, met Richard's with a heartbreaking mixture of vulnerability and a quiet, almost resigned hope. Nowhere, sir. The lady from social services, she said they're going to find me a special home tomorrow. Because of my... Alex hesitated, his small hand gesturing vaguely toward his wheelchair, a silent testament to an unseen struggle. Because of my condition? Richard finished for him, the word feeling alien on his tongue. Richard stood frozen, his mind reeling from the weight of Sarah's revelation. A son, his son. Frail and alone in a wheelchair, battling a condition Richard knew nothing about, looking at him with a fragile hope that pierced through years of carefully cultivated indifference. For the first time in decades, Richard Harding, the man who always had a plan, a solution, an answer, had absolutely no idea what to do next. An instinct, primal and unexpected, rose within him, overriding his carefully constructed logic. "Come with me," he said, the words barely a whisper, yet carrying a weight that surprised even himself. The sleek black Bentley pulled up to the circular driveway of Richard's sprawling mansion, the boy's folded wheelchair stowed awkwardly in the trunk. The journey from the cemetery had been a silent one, punctuated only by Richard's terse phone calls to his stunned lawyer and Alex's quiet observations of the passing scenery, his small hands clutching a worn backpack that contained the entirety of his young life. This is temporary," Richard declared stiffly as his elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, a woman who had witnessed the hardening of Richard's heart over the years, helped Alex maneuver his wheelchair across the polished marble floors of the grand foyer. The mansion, a monument to Richard's success, echoed with a profound emptiness. Vast, echoing spaces filled with expensive but impersonal furniture, abstract art that had cost millions but conveyed no warmth, no sense of home. The West Guest Suite, Richard instructed Mrs. Gable, pointedly refusing to meet Alex's uncertain gaze. Make arrangements for a nurse, someone experienced in these matters. That night, alone in the cavernous silence of his study, a glass of expensive scotch untouched on the mahogany desk before him, Richard reread Sarah's letter, the stark reality of her words, a cold weight in his chest. Doubt, a familiar companion, began to gnaw at the edges of his newfound understanding. Sarah must have been mistaken. The doctors had been unequivocal, their diagnosis delivered with a certainty that had never been questioned. He was sterile. It had been a convenient truth, a justification for his unwavering stance against having children, a point of contention that had ultimately driven a wedge between him and Sarah. His mind drifted back to their last bitter argument. Sarah's tearful pleas for adoption met with his cold pronouncements about his legacy. Now, the memory sent a shiver of something akin to shame down his spine. Richard opened his laptop, the cool metal a stark contrast to the turmoil within him, his fingers trembling slightly as he typed childhood neurodegenerative disorders into the search engine. As medical terms and grim prognoses filled his screen, a cold knot of fear tightened in his stomach. He slammed the laptop shut, the suddenness of the action echoing in the silent room, and with a decisive movement, he instructed his bewildered assistant to arrange for a DNA test immediately. Later, passing the closed door of the West Guest Suite, Richard paused, hearing the muffled sound of soft crying. His hand lifted to knock, then hesitated, and finally fell back to his side. Comfort was not a language he spoke, not an emotion he readily offered. Instead, he made another call, his voice sharp with urgency, as he demanded expedited DNA results from the lab. "I don't care if it's the end of the world," he snapped at his bewildered assistant. "I want those results tomorrow." The following morning, a hesitant knock on his study door announced Alex's presence. Richard found the boy silently observing the manicured gardens from the window of his wheelchair, his small face pale and drawn. The morning light caught the delicate curve of his cheek, and the resemblance to Sarah, a ghost of a memory Richard had tried to bury, struck him again, undeniable despite his desperate desire to refute it. "The doctors, they say I'll need the wheelchair all the time soon. It's getting harder to stand up each month," Alex said quietly, his voice devoid of self-pity, a clinical detachment that mirrored Richard's own when discussing uncomfortable truths. The quiet resignation in the child's voice disturbed Richard more than he cared to admit. I've arranged for a specialist to examine you," Richard said stiffly, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. "And a nurse. A full-time nurse arrives today." Alex finally turned to face him, his clear blue eyes, so like Sarah's, disconcertingly direct. "You don't have to keep me, you know. Mom said you might not want to." Something at those simple words, the quiet acceptance of potential rejection, the unspoken understanding of his unwanted status, pierced through the carefully constructed armor around Richard's heart. For a fleeting moment, he saw himself as a lonely, misunderstood child, facing his own emotionally distant father, forever feeling inadequate. Let's let's wait for the test results, Richard replied, his voice softer than he intended. Until then, this is where you stay. As Richard turned to leave, a small voice called out, halting him in his tracks. Mr. Harding? Richard turned back, surprised. I like your garden. Mom never had room for flowers. The messenger arrived 2 days later, a sealed envelope clutched tightly in his gloved hand. Richard locked himself in his study, the silence amplifying the frantic beating of his heart as he tore open the envelope, his hands unusually unsteady. The clinical language of the report blurred before his eyes, but one sentence stood out with stark, undeniable clarity. Probability of paternity, 99.98%. Richard sank heavily into his leather chair, the damning paper slipping from his numb fingers. Science, the bedrock of his ordered world, had betrayed him twice. First, with a false diagnosis of sterility that had shaped his life and his marriage, and now with the irrefutable confirmation that Alex was indeed his son, a living testament to a past he had tried to erase. A wave of nausea washed over him, followed by a profound and unsettling sense of responsibility. A sharp knock on his study door jolted him from his stunned silence. Rebecca Harris, the pediatric nurse he had hired, stood in the doorway, her professional demeanor tinged with a palpable tension. Mr. Harding, there's a Ms. Davies here from Social Services. She insists on speaking with you regarding Alex. In the formal living room, a stern-faced woman with sensible shoes and a thick briefcase waited, her expression conveying a mixture of concern and disapproval. Mr. Harding, she began without preamble, her voice crisp and official, I have serious concerns regarding the sudden and unprepared placement of a child with significant special needs into your home. There has been no proper assessment, no consideration for the specific requirements of a child like Alex. Richard's jaw tightened, his usual calm demeanor beginning to fray under the weight of her scrutiny. I have engaged specialists. I have ordered equipment. I am fully prepared to provide for his needs. It is not merely about financial provision, Mr. Harding, Ms. Davies countered sharply. Alex has complex physical and emotional needs. His condition is progressive. Are you truly prepared to witness your son lose his abilities one by one, to navigate the immense emotional toll this will take on him, and to provide the specific care and support he will require every step of the way? The word son hung in the air between them, a stark and unfamiliar label that resonated with a surprising force within Richard. We have excellent specialized foster care facilities that— No, Richard's voice cut through the room, sharp and decisive as steel. Alex stays here. Ms. Davies's eyes narrowed, her gaze unwavering. Mr. Harding, forgive my bluntness, but your reputation precedes you. You have built an empire by prioritizing profit over people. Why should I believe that you can suddenly prioritize the needs of a vulnerable child? Something flickered in the depths of Richard's usually impassive eyes. Was it anger, pride, or perhaps something deeper, something he couldn't quite name, a long dormant ember finally beginning to glow? Because, he said, the word feeling foreign yet undeniably true on his tongue, he is my son. The words echoed in the vast room, a declaration that surprised even himself. And I protect what is mine. After Miss Davies's departure, leaving behind a palpable tension and a thick file for Richard to review, he found himself drawn back to the research archives of his own company. Hours later, a cold wave of horror washed over him as he unearthed a long-abandoned research project focused on the exact neurodegenerative condition afflicting Alex. He personally had cut the funding for that project 8 months prior, when the projected profit margins fell short of his stringent expectations. Insufficient affected patient population to justify development costs, read his own callous notes, scrawled in his precise handwriting. Bile rose in his throat as the devastating realization hit him. His own ruthless business decisions had directly impacted the chances of his own son. Years of relentless cost-cutting, of viewing rare diseases as unprofitable ventures, flashed before his eyes. How many other children had his pursuit of profit condemned to a life without hope? Lost in the labyrinth of spreadsheets and medical reports, Richard found himself standing outside Alex's closed bedroom door, drawn by an unseen force. He watched through the slightly ajar door as Alex struggled with the laborious task of transferring himself from his wheelchair to the bed, his small body writhing with effort. The boy's quiet determination was evident in every strained muscle, every fleeting grimace that vanished as soon as he thought he might be observed. When Alex's weakened grip almost failed, sending him tumbling toward the floor, Richard instinctively took a step forward, his hand outstretched to help, then froze, a sudden wave of self-reproach washing over him. What right did he have to offer comfort now? How could hands that had signed the death warrant for research into his own son's cure now offer solace? "I've got it," Alex said firmly, his voice tight with effort but resolute, not looking up. Mom taught me how." After another agonizing attempt, his small body trembling with exertion, Alex finally managed to pull himself onto the bed. Settling himself with a quiet dignity that spoke volumes about a life spent fighting battles alone, Richard quietly retreated, the image of his son's solitary struggle seared into his mind. Returning to his study, where he made a single, urgent phone call. "Jenkins," he said, his voice low and urgent to his director of research, "restart Project Helios. I don't care about the cost. Find everything we have on pediatric neurodegenerative conditions. And Jenkins, this is now our top priority." Rebecca Harris, the pediatric nurse Richard had hired, adjusted the digital display on her watch, her movements efficient and practiced as she meticulously organized Alex's array of medications. 3 days into her employment at the sprawling Taylor mansion, she had already formed a sharp, albeit unspoken, opinion of her employer. William Taylor might be a pharmaceutical genius with billions to his name, but as a father, he was proving to be woefully inadequate. "Did your father ask about your physiotherapy schedule this morning, Alex?" Rebecca inquired gently, carefully helping Alex with his stretching exercises, his legs growing increasingly uncooperative with each passing day. Alex's gaze flickered toward the closed door of Richard's study, a silent question in his clear blue eyes. "He's very busy," Alex replied diplomatically, a hint of longing in his voice, as if willing Richard to materialize in the doorway. Rebecca's lips tightened into a thin line of disapproval. "Too busy for his own son," she murmured under her breath. Later that afternoon, while Rebecca was wheeling Alex through the vast, sparsely furnished living room of the mansion, they discovered a grand piano, tucked away in a rarely used corner. Dust motes danced in the faint sunlight filtering through the tall windows, coating the polished surface and suggesting it hadn't been played in years. "I used to take lessons," Alex said softly, his eyes lighting up for the first time since his arrival. A flicker of a memory rekindled. Before, before my hands started getting weaker. With a surge of determination that surprised Rebecca, Alex carefully maneuvered himself from his wheelchair onto the piano bench, his small body a study in focused effort. His first attempts to play were clumsy, his fingers not responding with the practiced dexterity of the past. But gradually, hesitantly, a simple melody emerged, its notes fragile and uncertain, yet undeniably recognizable. Neither Alex nor Rebecca noticed the tall figure standing silently in the shadows of the hallway, a forgotten business file clutched loosely in his hand.